What's up, y'all? This is Little Feather here, and I'm going to read a little bit of the book Fool's Crow by Thomas E. Males. Chapter 1. The Meeting at Lower Brule. In July of 1974, I went to Rosebud Sioux Reservation, located in southern South Dakota, and to the town of Rosebud to see a Sundance. While I was there, I contributed some of the food for the meals, and as a result, one night, at a powwow at the town of Mission, I was given an honored dance and the Sioux name Wyokie, which means one who helps, after the dance. Charles Ross, the superintendent of schools at the Lower Brule Reservation in eastern South Dakota, told me that his people were having their first trade fair in 80 years. He added that they were building a ceremonial dance ground and were badly in need of sod to cover it. Might you, he asked, be able to purchase the sod for them? As it turned out, I could and did, which led to another request from Charles. This time that I come to the trade fair, for the dedication of the ceremonial ground. And so it was that in early August I drove from California to my home in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and then on August 8th, left there and headed for the Lower Brule Reservation. August 8th, 1974 was not by any means an ordinary day, for it was the announcement date of the resignation from office of President Richard M. Nixon. Before I reached Las Vegas, New Mexico, every radio program was preoccupied with the news and with endless speculations as to what it portended. As I passed the little town of Raton, left New Mexico, and began the short ascent into Colorado's impressive mountains, slate gray clouds closed in overhead. Within moments, it started to rain so heavily that individual drops burst like water-filled plastic bags against the windshield. The evergreen boughs were sodden and dropping. The highway glistened with reflections, and the streams that paralleled the highway were soon rising and overrunning their banks. I stopped for gas at Trinidad, Colorado, and then left the freeway and headed straight east into rural Nebraska, where I would have the pleasure of a quiet back road to drive on. It rained steadily and hard, and I was forced to make an early stop at a motel. Television was all Richard M. Nixon. The weather forecast sneaked in between ponderous political comments by everyone from the man on the street to high government officials was for continual and heavy rain. The prediction turned out to be painfully accurate. All across Nebraska and into South Dakota, the water came pouring down. When at least I reached the Rosebud Sioux Reservation in Dallas Chief Eagle's home in the town of Rosebud, I had to run from the car to the house to avoid drowning. Dallas was a good friend and had offered to go to the Lower Brule with me. The two of us resumed the journey the following morning, and the entire countryside was laden with gray-green moisture. The sky itself was so black we drove with the car lights on. We reached Lower Brule at noon on Saturday and went directly to Trade Fairgrounds. As we swung into the parking area, we saw that only a handful of people were out and about. The fair booths were empty of craftspeople and goods, and the sod of the ceremonial ground, showed no evidence of use. We sat in the car and waited until a break in the rainfall allowed us to step out. When we did, it was into a quagmire of gumbo mud, the like of which I had not seen since my stay in Aleutian Islands during the winter of 1945 to 1946, following World War II. The rain began to beat down again, so we jumped back in the car and went looking for Charles Ross, finally locating him at the school gymnasium where arrangements were being made to hold the powwow indoors that night. It was the only dry place in town large enough to house the more than 1,000 Indians who would attend. Charles told us that over a third of those who had come to the fair had already given up and gone home. He was miserable, and with good reason. The hopes of the tiny Lower Brule band had been high as could be for the fair. Actually, they had advertised it as their trade fair renewal, and it was really a symbol of hope for band renewal. It was what they needed to become something again, so everyone had worked out doubtly hard to make it a success. Now, however, the rain had almost washed away their chances. One ray of hope remained. Earlier on Saturday, Charles had taken a field pipe to the holy man and ceremonial chief of the Sioux, Frank Fool's Crow, and asked him to split the clouds. It was known by many that he could perform the feat as could other so holy men who had dreamed of thunder beings and thus received the power to divide the rain clouds and keep an area of land dry between them. For more than an hour, Fool's Crow stood on a hill above the fairground and prayed in the rain with his double-tailed eagle feather bonnet on his head. When he came down, he told Charles not to worry, that on Sunday the sky would be clear, the sun would be out, and people should believe this and stay at the fair. The rain did stop for a time when we entered the gymnasium about 8 o'clock on Saturday night. Although the clouds were still there and threatening, inside the huge gymnasium the drums began to beat and soon took on a tripled intensity. The booming sound and the singers' voices reverberated off the walls and ceilings. The miseries of the people were soon forgotten as they were absorbed in dancing and fellowship. I enjoyed it tremendously. Early in the evening, a Sioux elder and his wife made their way toward the side of the gymnasium where Dallas and I were seated. They were warmly greeted by many people as they came our way. They were a striking couple. She was attired in a full-length blue dress with an overall pattern of red and yellow flowers. He wore a Western-style French buckskin jacket, long black braids, which I later learned was a wig covering those cropped gray hair befitting his 80-some years, and a high-crowned black reservation hat with a broad brim. They sat down directly in front of me, and in a little while, Dallas introduced us. They were Frank and Kate Fool's Crow, and he was that very ceremonial chief of the Teton Sioux I had heard about earlier. Their faces were marvelous with the grandeur only an aged, full-blooded Sioux can have. Despite the superb dancing by the Indians and an honor dance and a star blanket given me in Thanksgiving for the sod by the Lower Brule Sioux that night, I found myself staring at Fool's Crow constantly. He was chosen to carry the Oglala flag for the Grand Entry Parade, and during the evening I watched several young men get down in front of him on one or both knees when they came to talk to him. No elder passed by him without a nod. I was greatly impressed and absolutely delighted when Fool's Crow asked Dallas and me to come to his teepee for a visit the next morning. We arose early and I went immediately to the window and drew the curtain. Off in the distance was a bank of black clouds, but directly above us the sun was shining. The sky was a pure blue and only a few small clouds could be seen. By 9 o'clock, the ground at the fairground was firming up, and people were busily setting up their displays. The clouds were split. Dallas and I went to visit Fool's Crow, arriving at his teepee about 10 o'clock. The ceremonial chief was sitting outside on a folding camp chair, and Kate was cooking. She fed us delicious fried bread, coffee, and I had my first wild turnip soup, which was excellent. Then, with Dallas translating for both of us, Frank and I began to talk about many things: the weather, the prospects for the last day of the fair, and what was happening among the Sioux. I noted then that his eagle feather bonnet was hanging out to dry on the front of his teepee. It was the only evidence now of a rain-soaked yesterday. got wet, he said, in one of his few statements in English. Fool's Crow knew my name by now, that I was from California, that Dallas and I were close friends, and that I had more than a deep interest where Indians were concerned. He had seen the sod I had given and also my honor dance, but he did not yet know that I was a writer and an artist who had done several books about Indians. Therefore, Dallas and I were both astonished when he suddenly changed the conversation and said that during his last vision quest at Bear Butte in 1965, his god, Tonka, had told him that although he had been a humble man with little to offer, the time had come for him to tell certain things about himself and his Teton people to a person who would be made known to him. This way the record would be kept and the world would know about it. He knew now that grandfather had brought me here to Lower Brule for this very purpose. It was for us to make arrangements for a book. Many others had come to him and asked if they could do this, but always he had known that there were not, the one grandfather meant. Equally fascinating to me was that as we talked, the same thoughts he had begun to run through my mind. As it appeared now, my long trip to Lower Brule was more than coincidence. Agreement was immediate. We would do the book. Once the pact was established, I went to my car to get him a copy of the book, The Mystic Warriors of the Plains. He accepted it with the customary 4 gestures used by the Sioux to seal an agreement, and without the slightest hint of surprise, he had known intuitively that I was a writer. Since Fool's Crow speak only a little English, it was agreed that Dallas, whom Fool Crow considers to be his spiritual son, would sit with us to interpret and assist as we talked. There was no way of knowing that day where the discussion would take us. I realized that everything would depend upon how much license Fool's Crow felt he had to reveal the secret and most important things of his life. Indians are by custom very close-mouthed about such things, but in the end I learned even more than I hoped for. This is not to suggest that the information came easily. Tonka had commanded Fool's Crow to tell a story, including the medicine aspects, and there was nothing I waited for more anxiously than for him to lead me onto his secret life of visions, medicine, and prophecy. Okay, so that's the end of page 4. Next time, I'm going to start with page 5, and we shall read on from there. Thank you guys for visiting me today, watching this video, and listening to me read the book Fool's Crow by Thomas E. Mails. All right, until next time, peace out.